Hi, it's time for another grumpy old herbalist. So, what am I grumping about now? I'm grumping about the fact that we don't always get the phytochemistry right. Yeah, I know it's boring, and look at all these structures here. It looks like gobbledygook, doesn't it? Do they mean anything? I mean, many people, when they undertake herbal studies, they really don't like studying the phytochemistry, but it is so important. And it's really important we get it right. And I'm going to give you just a few examples from the sublime to the ridiculous of what can happen when we get it wrong. And when I see this, it makes me really grumpy. So, what are a few key issues that I'm going to use to as examples? So, basic errors, just plain basic errors, dumb things. Sorry, misattributions, and a new phenomenon that's been around a while, but it's picking up pace thanks to Dr. Google. This one called reverse engineering. So let's look at some of these basic errors. Valerian root contains Valium. I'm going to talk about that a bit more. Anthocyanins are the same as flavonoids. And one I've talked about already when I talk about herb-drug interaction and the misinformation there, that plant coumarins, and you can see them there in the diagram, in the image, are chemically the same as anticoagulant drugs. Well, they're not, and they're very chemically different. If you look at those structures, you look at the structures of anticoagulant drugs. And therefore, they don't have anticoagulant properties. That's the obvious conclusion. But I've covered that more in the herb-drug interaction postings. So let's look at this valerian root contains Valium. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, what? Seriously? But it's true, to the point where a Herbalgram article, as you can see, talking about valerian, has noted, as I have noted, and this has been going on for decades, some modern popular writers have confused the anti-anxiety drug Valium, which has the chemical name diazepam, as being derived from valerian. But it's not. There's no connection between the two except for the phonetic similarity. And the word is that the phonetic similarity is no mistake, because diazepam or Valium was developed in Switzerland. Now, Switzerland has a strong herbal tradition, and they love their valerian in Switzerland. So they've developed a new drug to calm you down. What better thing to do than to base the name on the reputation of this popular calming herb, valerian? So that's the story I've heard. You can fact check it and please tell me if I'm wrong. But that's apparently why Valium sounds similar to valerian. It was a marketing ploy. But chemically, they're not the same. And you think, surely no one believes that nonsense. Well, have a look at this posting on Quora from this gentleman. I got really frustrated when I was in rehab because one staff member wouldn't allow valerian tea, as she insisted it was in Valium. So there you have it. That's from a member of staff, presumably a nurse. So no, valerian doesn't contain diazepam. There's the chemical structure of diazepam. You've got a ring there with two nitrogens in it. Yeah, you can find that in nature. And by the way, the irony is that some scientists have found quite low levels of diazepam occurring naturally in plants, but I'm a bit skeptical about that for this reason. See that chlorine attached on there? Plants don't tend to, well, they can do it. They can put halogens onto organic molecules, so possibly. But that's generally stuff they do in drug synthesis, add chlorines and use, rings with multiple nitrogen. In contrast, there are other active components in valerian, but if we look at the Valipotria, it's been the most chemically complex in terms of their structure. You can see they're completely unrelated to diazepam and most notably no nitrogen there at all. So there's this great article in The Conversation, blueberries and strawberries slow cognitive decline. And it says people who eat greater amounts of blueberries and strawberries could delay their cognitive aging by years, according to data from a large-scale study conducted over more than 3 years that was published in the journal Annals of Neurology. But this was obviously done by, epidemiologists and statisticians who had no phytochemistry at all. Because look at the title of their paper, Dietary Intake of Berries and Flavonoids in Relation to Cognitive Decline. Well, sorry, but have a look at those strawberries, right? They're red. What about blueberries? They're blue. That's not due to flavonoids. Where does the name flavonoid come from? From the Latin flavus, meaning yellow. So flavonoids tend to be yellow to white. And it's only the unique chemistry of what's in strawberries and blueberries that give that blue, purple, red coloration. And they're called anthocyanins. It's got nothing at all to do with flavonoids. Go back and do your phytochemistry, guys. And even comments on it by experts. So you could see this research professor at the University of South Australia. He's talking about, based on commenting on this research, talking about flavonoids. What I think is happening here that's not considered in this paper, and he makes a good comment, is that the flavonoids are acting on the blood vessels in the brain and the eyes to improve the circulation, except they're not flavonoids, they're anthocyanins. So let's have a look at the chemistry here. Over the left, you see the 4 main flavonoid groups: chalcones, flavonones, flavones, and flavonols. And they're all particularly characterized by that carbonyl group you see there that I've marked. Well, we go over to the anthocyanins and you see, no, there's no carbonyl group there. And what's more, the oxygen in the ring is positively charged, and so you've got a high level of what's called conjugation. Yeah, that's for the chemistry nerds, I know. But what that means is it shifts the absorption spectrum of a molecule from the ultraviolet into the visible spectrum. And that's why you get the coloration. Now, with flavonoids, it only happens, there is a bit of conjugation there, not much. So it only happens sufficiently to get down to yellow. But of course, it's much more marked. All of these alternate conjugation is these alternative double and single bonds you can see there all the way through. Plus that positive charge helps the conjugation as well. And therefore it shifts it down to blue, red, purple. And anthocyanins will be blue or red, often depending on the pH. So they actually change color as the pH changes. So not flavonoids, anthocyanins. And you might think I'm nitpicking. Well, I am, but it's an important nitpick. And that is that people get the wrong idea. So where do we get flavonoids from? Onions and apples and things like that. Well, if you look at the title of that research, people think, I need to eat onions and apples to improve my cognition and arrest my cognitive decline, where the research is actually showing it's the anthocyanins in the berries that is doing it. So that's the first class, just plain basic areas of people who haven't a solid grounding in phytochemistry or even chemistry, if you look at Valerian and Valium. Let's now look at some misattributions. And there was a doozy that came through that affected the status, the legal status of wormwood for a while in Australia, because the regulatory authorities said, we're recalling all products that contain artemisinin because we have concerns about artemisinin in pregnancy and we want to change the warnings on the label. Well, fair enough, but I don't think it needed a recall. Everyone knows, if you're well trained, that all sorts of wormwoods are not good in pregnancy, be it artemisinin or whatever else they contain. But they clearly expressed that their concern was about artemisinin, and artemisinin doesn't occur in normal wormwood. You know, the worming wormwood that we use, Artemisia absinthium, it occurs in Artemisia annua, the Chinese wormwood or the sweet wormwood, or Changhao as it's known. And only in certain chemical races of Artemisia annua, because when they first studied that the artemisinin in Artemisia annua was good for malaria, they found that it was only used in certain regions of China, even though the species was growing elsewhere. And they found that in those regions where they used it, there was a high level of artemisinin in those lines of Artemisia annua. Now, I know there's some low-grade research that suggests that maybe wormwood contains artemisinin, but if it does, it's a trace. And I guarantee you do a normal analysis of any wormwood product, you could find Artemisia absinthium wormwood, the common European wormwood. You won't find any artemisinin, yet we have a government that doesn't understand, or regulatory authorities that don't appear to have enough phytochemistry, and needlessly hampered the work of legitimate herbal practitioners. You bet I was grumpy about that. Get your phytochemistry right, guys. And here's another one. A certain species of Astragalus accumulate selenium. Now, as you can see in the photograph there's a picture of Astragalus, because Astragalus species are loco-weeds. So, the animals feed on the Astragalus and they go crazy. Now, there's thought to be two reasons for that. The first is that these species of Astragalus contain swainsonin, a toxin that does it, but also because they might also be selenium accumulators, and it's partly selenium toxicity. But I can guarantee you that the Astragalus we use, that is used in traditional Chinese medicine and has been for thousands of years, Astragalus membranaceus, is not a high-level selenium accumulator. Therefore, you have no concerns about toxicity from normal Astragalus in terms of its selenium content. And yet we find in a textbook, in a published textbook, as Astragalus may contain selenium, ingestion of large amounts may lead to selenosis. Or maybe in a parallel universe, but not this one. And again, it's not understanding the phytochemistry and the fact that, various plant accumulators and the capacity to accumulate whatever, selenium or whatever, will vary from species to species. And you can't extrapolate the phytochemistry of one species of Astragalus onto another. Now, let's look at this phenomenon now that I've referred to as reverse engineering. So what's happening there? So what happens is some phytochemical in a plant is used as a precursor to make a drug. So they extract the phytochemical out of the plant. They then add bits to that phytochemical. It then has these properties as a drug. And now what's happening, I find, especially on Dr. Google, people are reverse engineering and saying, oh, well, this plant contains A, which is used to make the drug B, which has properties C. Therefore, the plant A also has properties C that you get from drug B. Sorry if I've confused you, but you get what I'm saying. You can't say the plant has the same properties as the drug that's manufactured from the plant, changing the chemistry. If it was the same chemical, yeah, most certainly, like artemisinin, it's a drug and it's also found in a herb. But where it's changed by chemical synthesis, you can't reverse engineer and say the original starting material, the herb, has that property. Yet it happens often and too much now. So here are a couple of examples. Willow bark. So we know willow bark was used as the basis to form aspirin, but aspirin is a synthetic molecule. It's not found in nature. And the natural form that's found is the salicylate. And then various plants, including pine needles and star anise, contain shikimic acid, which is a precursor for Tamiflu. But does that mean that that plant has significant antiviral activity? You can guess where I'm going there. The claims that people are making on Dr. Google that, brew up your pine needles and you won't catch, you got it. Seriously? So let's look at the first one, aspirin versus salicylates. So what's that one there? That's aspirin. What's the synthetic part of the aspirin? The acetyl group. It's acetyl salicylic acid. That's just straight salicylic acid. So you see that ring part has been added on is extra. And it's that extra part, that acetyl group, that binds onto cyclooxygenase enzyme in platelets and irreversibly inactivates the COX, the cyclooxygenase enzyme, in the platelets, which means those platelets won't stick together and function as they normally should. So you get what I'm saying, that the high blood thinning properties assigned to aspirin are due to the synthetic acetyl group that's been added to the salicylate, and you cannot reverse engineer and say, oh, willow bark is the herbal aspirin, and you can take willow bark to thin your blood. You don't need to take the aspirin from the doctor. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Basic misunderstanding of phytochemistry, and let's throw pharmacology in there as well. So let's now look at the final example. There's shikimic acid. It's a very common molecule in plants. Just about, I don't know, half, maybe more of the plant kingdom produce it to some level because it's very significant in a particular metabolic pathway that plants use called the shikimic acid pathway. There's its structure there. The star anise has fairly high levels. Pine leaves have various levels. By the way, don't go brewing up and drinking pine leaves. You're playing roulette, Russian roulette with your health, unless you really know what you're doing, because some species of pine are quite toxic, A, and some species of pine are abortifacient, B. Do you really need to do that? So, shikimic acid, and there's only modest levels in pine leaves. Why bother? If you want shikimic acid, go to star anise. But anyway, that's an aside. So if you look at shikimic acid, look how much they change it to make Tamiflu. Look, they add a bit here, there to the hydroxyl group. They change the stereochemistry. So you see that bit poking is poking, behind the plane of the screen. And that bit that they change it to is poking out of the screen. So they change the stereochemistry and can add nitrogens and change it up here as well. So to say that shikimic acid, it does have some antiviral properties in a test tube, yeah, but so there are hundreds and hundreds of different phytochemicals I can tell you, and I've discussed that issue, and it's in my new book, and we won't go there now. But so shikimic acid cannot be possibly expected to have similar antiviral properties to Tamiflu. And you cannot reverse engineer and say, drink star anise and you won't catch viral infections. It might, but hey, I'm waiting for the clinical trial, not some person who doesn't understand basic phytochemistry, who's probably not herbally qualified, giving advice on the internet about what people should do to counter viruses. This has to stop. Sorry, guys. I'm going to get a lot of hate mail out of this, but I don't care. So thank you for listening to my grump. And as you can see in the little diagram there, phytochemicals are phytochemicals because often the plant produces them to fight against anything that's threatening its existence, because a plant can't move away from a threat, so it often has a chemical response to a threat. So just throw that little bit in the end for a bright note. But come on, let's get the phytochemistry right, because it makes me really grumpy when people don't.